paid the ultimate sacrifice to keep us safe. So can we begin a minute's silence now in remembrance of them? Thank you. I know the situation in Croydon was unprecedented, and the situation was extraordinary, and I don't think we know all the details yet. And it'll be some time before the investigation is completed. But I wonder, Chief, whether that will give us cause to review the security situation for our own investigation center staff, and indeed any officers involved either in stop and search or strip search.
Well, Commissioner, I'm watching what's taking place in the Met. We'll await to see what the outcome of the investigations into those tragic circumstances are. Once we understand what happened and we understand the actual incident itself, then we can then obviously review our own arrangements. But up to that point, I don't want to preempt what might not have happened. I think that would be really unhelpful. We'll wait to see what the circumstances are, and if there are lessons to be learned for us, then we can make sure we do.
I understand. Okay, thank you for that. Are others getting a bit of a feedback on the line?
Lynn, I think, Lynn, if you could mute your microphones. I think you and Tracy are together, aren't you? And it's causing some. If you put yours on mute.
Perhaps we all have to be on mute when we're not speaking. Would that make a difference? Yeah.
I think it's Lynn's office, I think.
Well, then you're catching it now. Everyone says it's your fault. What can we do? Okay, let's get down to business. The first item is declarations of personal or prejudicial interest. Anyone, anything to declare? No?
Not for the Constabulary side, Commissioner, I don't believe so, no.
Okay. We then have the minutes of the last meeting, which were the 21st of July. Sharon, are there any actions arising from those minutes?
Yes, Commissioner. On the top of page 5, we have one action from last time where you asked for an update from the Constabulary on their plans to increase diversity in the organisation and the training provided to new and current officers.
And that I have received. Thank you very much.
And that completes the actions, Commissioner.
Okay. The next agenda item is an important subject, a particularly pertinent one at the moment, which is good stewardship of taxpayers' money, which begins on page 10 of the papers in front of us. Who's going to present that?
Commissioner Peter will talk through the item under the good stewardship of taxpayers' money.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Commissioner, the budget monitoring report is set out with the papers, and I'll cover the highlights from that report. The report is at the end of July, forecasting to the end of the year, and the Constabulary is forecasting an underspend of £500,000. This is an improvement of 484,000 compared to that previously reported at PAF, and in the main that is due to the fact that the Home Office have agreed to fund medical grade PPE, and in addition to that we did an in-year review of savings as outlined in the report. Section 3 outlines the savings review that we did. We identified £1.5 million of savings and are redirecting nearly 900,000 of that to be used to fund the capital programme and therefore reduce the need to borrow and protect reserves, which is a prudent course of action. Paragraph 8.5, worthy of note, is the savings that we'll be making from the motor insurance contract on the 1st of October. This is a result of the investment that we've made in telematics and dash cams and skills recording and the subsequent improvements that we have made to driver standards and our driver risk management programme. Norfolk will see a reduction of premium of about 140,000 a year, and as the contract starts on the 1st of October, we'll see about 70,000 of that in this financial year, which is a good news story in terms of where we are going on that journey. The capital programme has slippage that is forecast of nearly £15 million. The bulk of that relates to the new Broadland Police Station, which has obviously recently had planning permission granted on it, and is subject to a process that we're going through with you, Commissioner, in terms of various gateways to proceed with that project, but the bulk of spend has now slipped into the next financial year. That's a brief overview of the highlights of the report, and I'm happy to take any questions at that point on the financial paper.
So if you're projecting an underspend of £500,000 for the current year, what does that say about our needs going forward? We'll face precept discussions at the end of this year. Don't need any money?
No, in terms of the scenario planning that we've been doing for next year, based on in a worst case scenario planning, we face a budget gap of about £7.5 million. The in-year review of savings is obviously creating a buffer to protect reserves. We've re-established the budget support reserve, which we were going to remove as austerity had come to an end. But we've already put £1 million into that as a result of an underspend arising last year, and that, along with the in-year savings review and the protection of reserves and the £500,000 underspend that we've got this year, will act as a buffer for any funding shock that we see as a result of the Chancellor announcing the funding settlement later in the year. So at the moment, that will just create us a buffer in terms of that worst case scenario planning.
So is the public to understand if there was to be a precept increase, that money is to pay down a historic debt rather than to improve police services? Will
all be up for discussion with you as we go through our outcome-based budgeting, Commissioner. Clearly, we are setting a significant challenge in addressing in terms of resource. As we move through that process, we'll obviously discuss with you, should you be given any precept freedoms, what that would give rise to by way of an increase in funding, and therefore how we should look to spend that. It's too early to say at this point, Commissioner, as we go through the process and as we understand what the funding position will be. What's been the loss of income since the pandemic began? So we have lost somewhere in the £500,000 across the driving offender scheme and other income generation that we would have had. Clearly, the government have given an indication that we'll be able to reclaim an amount in a similar way to local authorities. If that was the case, then that income shortfall would reduce somewhere in the region of about 120,000.
Thank you. Do we have any fixed-term contract employees?
Don't have that information to hand, Commissioner, but there will be a number of fixed-term contracts, but it's not a huge amount.
Interesting to know how much money we're spending on fixed term contract employees, and whether if we have to consider rationalizations going forward, whether that would be one of the first places sensibly look.
Well, in terms of the outcome-based process, Commissioner, we've asked all departmental heads obviously to look at areas such as vacancies and attrition and those kind of contractual positions before we look to get into redundancies. We've looked at non-pay and the capital programme again to see if we can reduce spending in those areas to do as much as we can to protect jobs.
We've got to get that R rate, the redundancy rate, down to 0, don't we, if we can?
And Commissioner, we've set our stall out to do that, but so this will be your 4th, 5th budget setting, and this one is going to be unique. We're obviously having to deal with the challenges of COVID, but we're also then having to deal with the challenges of meeting government's expectations around uplift and being monitored very, very carefully around the uplift and the uplift numbers, and we have targets to hit, which means that any savings that we are going to have to make is going to have to come more and more efficient and effective in our back office through a review of contracts, and we're doing our best to try and avoid this number of police staff that we employ, because there are other places that we can make savings. So we've put a more on the recruitment of police staff unless they are in business critical posts. That accounting for a percentage of the underspend. But imagine we are going to be having to bridge a deficit, and we obviously have best case and worst case scenarios, but we are facing a challenge of having to bridge a deficit, one hand tied behind our back. And I think it's almost inevitable that there will be reverse civilianisation. So unfortunately, where there are police staff vacancies, you can see the circumstances where police officers might be posted into those current vacancies, because that's the only way that we'll be able to save money to bridge the deficit. And even in best case scenario, there is still a significant deficit to overcome.
Well, that worst case scenario you describe, it sounds on the face of it like robbing Peter to pay Paul. And if that is the case, you're robbing police resources to fill in for necessary staff resources.
Yes, and I fear that could well happen. I don't want, but obviously we're engaging throughout this period very closely with Unison. But Karen, our Unison, understands the challenges that we face, and that's the challenge that we as a command team face. That's the challenge as chief I face. That where we have been looking to make savings, we've been able to reduce posts and replace them with police staff, because on occasions that they are more efficient and more effective. And you'll know the fantastic work that's taken by investigators. I'd like to double the number of police digital investigators.
I'd like you to. But
the irony is that my police officer, so it's a real challenge for you. It's a challenge for me. And Norfolk, in comparison to the force in the country, is in that unique position where we don't have police community support officers. We increased our police officer numbers. Of course, that hasn't been taken into consideration when our baseline has been set about the total number of police officers that we have on our books. So it's almost a double whammy for you, how we bridge that deficit. And
well, you were very daring in mentioning PCSOs, I think, at this moment. The recollection is, the reality is that for the first 7 years of service, those PCSOs were costing more money to the taxpayers than regular officers, and you have to your great credit, I think, to have more officers out on the street today than we had 4 years ago. The PCSOs, and these are officers that are fully warranted, that can investigate, can arrest.
Look, absolutely. So look, I stand by that decision. It's an absolute plus. But when you compare Norfolk to every other force in the country, those other forces have not cashed in PCSOs to increase the police officer number, which means our police officer number is going to be slightly inflated in comparison to our most similar forces, purely because we don't have PCSOs on our books. And that means some forces, I suspect, will inevitably be contemplating reducing PCSOs to bridge any deficit. Mm-hmm. We don't have that luxury.
And did I hear you correctly to suggest that Uplift, which is a national government initiative, in fact, is adding to our problems?
Well, it will add, absolutely adding to my headache around how I bridge my budget deficit, because I can't reduce my police officer number. So let me give you an example. We could review a department which has got 2 inspectors in, and we decide we don't need 2 or 3 inspectors. We've got 3 currently. We only need 1. So you turn around and say, by review of this department, we've saved, let's say, with on costs, £180,000. That's no longer the case. Can't get. So all that would happen is I'd have to find an alternative home for those 2 inspectors that are leaving that department. That's not a saving.
Does this imply that we've bought a pig in a poke then? We've been given this gift, to put it that way, from central government, potentially, what, 225 plus, but the total cost of them is not coming from central government as well?
I know that the total cost of them is coming from central government, so they're all funded. Okay. But that's kind of missing the point, because if you've then got to find savings, as I said, you can only find those savings through reviews of contracts, become more efficient and effective in your procurement, more efficient and effective in how you run your offices that have got police staff in. But actually, we're talking millions here in savings, even in best case scenario, and that can only be achieved by reducing police staff numbers and through, of course, those other reviews of non-pay budgets.
So the Uplift numbers are, in itself, it's a neutral factor.
Yes.
It's extra officers, yes. But the cost of them, that includes estates, for instance, the means to house these people properly across the county.
So yes. So again, we have had to increase the number of people we are learning and development in our training department. We've had to put an additional person into RMU and into finance, or we'll have to put somebody into finance to be able to manage the payroll. Now, there is included within that money around the Uplift, there is additional money to support that infrastructure. Mm-hmm. But the headline for you and I is, we are then going to have to find millions of pounds in savings, and we're going to have to find millions of pounds in savings whilst protecting our police officer numbers, which will, I think, inevitably mean that there will be some police staff vacancies that are currently vacant that we will have a police officer have to go into.
When you lose police, you started with a baseline that you had to put to Westminster on the basis of which they decided the allocation.
Yes.
So there's no potential, as you deal with natural attrition through retirement, resignation, whatever, police officers, of leaving some positions vacant.
Absolutely. Can't do that.
No, can't do that. Okay. So you're satisfied that the associated costs of the Uplift numbers in all these areas, whether it's training and development, whether it's accommodation and so on, is being met in full from Westminster?
Not going to be so bold as to say met in full. I will say that some of the support that's required around police staff will be met, but in terms of accommodation and making sure that we have all the accommodation we require, all the associated costs, I don't believe that's been included in the Uplift funds. But Peter would be able to confirm that for me.
Yeah, in terms of the funding that we got for year 1, the settlement looked a more generous Uplift element in order to address some of the the investment that was required in police staff and estate and kit and equipment for those officers, but there's been no indication that it would be as generous in year 2 or year 3. In fact, what we're more likely, or what we're forecasting, is that we're likely to get the cost of the officers and nothing else on top, because the funding settlement was more generous in year 1.
So that's something to watch very closely. We really need to insist, don't we, if that we take these officers that are very well, that they don't is not for free, that the taxpayers of this county can't be expected to find the means to totally subsidize them, and that we have an expectation that the incremental costs will be met by central government. I presume the NC and the APCC will be registering those points.
Yes, all these points are being registered, but the point I'd wish to make during this conversation is when it comes to precept, and if you have any precept flexibility, I will be wanting to have a conversation with you that identifies the unique position that Norfolk finds itself in, the implications for us of uplift, and it then comes down, it is very much based upon, we have an opportunity to put more police officers into visible roles and into our communities, and to maintain our community numbers. But if we don't bridge the funding deficit, we will inevitably see police officers in uniform taken off the streets to fill functions that are in non-visible posts and in posts been more than done.
2020 vision is a wonderful thing, isn't it? Looking back, do you feel that perhaps you gave away some of your potential bargaining room now, your bargaining chip, by perhaps too early PCSOs?
No, I absolutely do not. That at all. And you only have to look at the constabulary enjoyed tackling the counter threat. That's where the investment has gone into. It's gone into that proactive capability. Our moonshot teams, our neighbourhood policing teams, are the managers. It's been a win-win for us. Who on earth could ever have predicted the COVID crisis, the implications for the economy, and a manifesto commitment even before anybody knew to talk to police officers? I mean, look, I'd like to think that I can see into the future a little bit, and I've been reasonably good at for challenges as we come forward, but I don't think anybody could have predicted the position we've.
And apropos, and I want to a message, but I want to congratulate Constabulary outstanding presentation last night on Channel 5 Suspect, which I think was to a great credit of all the officers, particularly those, the investigative resources that you have, and the professionalism and the persistence they showed, and the understanding and sympathy to the victim of horrendous violent crimes. I think was to the great credit of Norfolk Constabulary, and I think it's just the first of a series, is it not?
It is. It's a series of 4, I believe it is, and I'm really pleased. I watched last night, and I was really proud of what Chris did. I've messaged them all this morning. Credit to your that program last night. Well done.
Yeah, marvelous. Okay, Peter, you're going to continue with the rest of this agenda item?
There is an estates paper that's also attached as part of that element that just covers off the estate, covers off some issues around our response to COVID-19, outlines where we are with the Broadland station, although that paper was submitted prior to the planning approval of that. It outlines areas of our estate that we're looking to dispose of, and those that we're looking to collaborate with in terms of our fire collaboration and wasn't going to say much more on that other than it's a status report.
What do you reckon will be the impact of flexible working in terms of the police estate?
Commissioner, my view is that we have demonstrated that we can work efficiently and effectively using a far more flexible approach and mobile working, and that we've definitely reaped the rewards of that. We've the rewards not only in the effects but in our sick and the use of the estate. There is a comprehensive review of the state that's currently ongoing. I think it's inevitable there will be recommendations that will be brought to you as the state that the recommendations around what the future will look like.
I hope when this is made available publicly, when you say the owner of the estate, people don't think that I'm one of the. It's for the 7 or 8 months for the moment. On page 25, you on the estates, you say that the 4 classrooms, initial 4 classrooms, will be opened by the during this month of September.
Students will take up occupancy, I think, in 2 years' time. All the tech, it's not in yet. So the first 2 cohorts of students that will occupy Pethersett Old Hall School this calendar year, they won't have the full benefits of the investment in the technology that's going in, but that will go in early in the new year. I was there on Friday, and it's looking really, really good. It's really impressive.
Okay, thank you for that.
And can I just say, Nick deserves, a lot of credit for getting us to this point. It's on schedule. You need to go and have a look, Commissioner, because you will be really proud of what Nick and the team, Becca Jackman, Marcel, Frang, and Duncan have done. Well,
I look forward to doing that early on. And the one handicap of these Teams meetings is I can't really identify the blush on Nick's cheeks.
There is no blush, Commissioner, and even Mr. Jasper's happy that the budget's in good shape too, which is obviously my priority, as Peter knows.
When you're both happy, I'm happy. On page, I'm sorry for this rather scattered way. I'm trying to deal with my notes as we go along, and my next comment was on page 28, the graph that shows there. And I think we're going beyond estates now. It shows the public satisfaction rate with policing in the county has gone down by a significant amount. It's gone down by 4.6%. How are we to understand that?
Commissioner, I think the key thing for me is that actually, when you look at those survey statistics, that points us that whilst it's disappointing to see the reduction, sees us as joint fifth nationally across the whole of the country. So whilst it's disappointing to see those figures going down, I think it's represented the fact they're going down nationally. That doesn't, 2 wrongs don't make a right, but actually we're still the fifth best performing in terms of confidence. And what's really interesting is when you look at our own, which we have now surveyed, I believe it's in the region of 4,000 people, those individuals that think that we are doing an excellent or a very good job on our stats is at 89%. So I think that a lot is focused upon the way that are asked, but actually when you look at our own survey, encouraging the crime survey of England and Wales.
Okay. Does that extend to the most immediate public interface with police? Typically will be 101.
So, Commissioner, if you're aware, and Nick might know the date of this, but we are, I believe we have signed satisfaction with people who are being engaged through Operation Solve. That will give us a really good idea of our satisfaction statistics. because a significant percentage of all crime is being dealt with by the SOLV team. Once we start to get those statistics, we'll obviously factor those into our reporting mechanisms for you, so you can be challenging around what those satisfaction rates look like. But actually, that will be the first time that we will have done this in anger with such significant numbers. We'll keep that survey going. Once we start to get the statistics that come through, we'll obviously share them with you.
And I think it's fair to acknowledge that my office is jointly funding research.
Well, I think actually you're doing another piece of research. You're doing a perception survey. There is a survey that's being done by the SOLV team, which is all those individuals that have their crimes looked at through a desk-based investigation. I believe that your perception survey is a different survey over and above that, Commissioner. So there will be 3 lots of survey data that we will now be getting access to. Your perception survey, the SOLV survey, own confidence and satisfaction data, plus Police Service of England and Wales. Sharon, I believe that's right.
I'm not involved in that. It might be that Gavin can give us a steer.
Gary.
I don't think Gavin's online, is he?
He is, yes.
Yes, he is.
You there, Gavin?
I'm
Oh,
alive,
that was
yes,
GT. That was a gin and tonic.
that's correct in terms of we are jointly working on the survey.
Okay. I find increasingly when you deal with certain service providers at the end of the stars, 4 stars, and so on. What do you think of that idea for 101?
It looks like a good idea, but I'd want to understand what the cost is and what the question set looks like. So based upon our existing resource numbers, that would cause some real headaches in terms of the 9s and the 101 that we would wish to do.
Sorry to interrupt you, Chief. I think it's a mechanical thing in my experience. It says at the end of the call, if you're happy to stay on the line and take the survey, then it's a mechanical thing, and you click on 3 stars, 5 stars, and you put any comment if you want, and then that can be collated and looked at probably digitally later. But you and I both know that for all the public meetings we've had, probably the most persistent and it probably is the squeaky wheel, one of wheels that we hear from, are those who say, I've been kept waiting for 86 or whatever, and I know that we've made mammoth efforts to improve the service, and we've directed more calls appropriately online, and so as we're still getting recent days, people say that the 101 is letting us down. We're doing all these surveys. Wouldn't it be interesting to let's find out really what people make of the 101 service? Is that all you're going to get are the moaners, those that are unhappy with the service, and that could give you a false impression. But is it not worth some things looking at?
Certainly, I can certainly look at it. I expect it will come with additional cost. I think that will be absolutely inevitable, and the budgets are tight. I think what I would ask is, Commissioner, and Nick will be able to detail around this, but the new switchboard arrangements go live in, I think the staff are now coming on board. Once being trained, starts in December, Nick. And
yes, that's correct.
That will make a big difference. There's now 5 sergeants working with big uplifting switchboard staff. SOLV is now getting to the point whereby it will be fully resourced and sized with 6 sergeants now. That should, so yeah, I can find out what an electric will deliver for us and what it might cost, but to give you the reassurance, ability to handle calls, handle them efficiently, effectively, the ultimate cog in the wheel, if you like, or the brick in the wall will go in effect in a couple of months' time. That should make a big difference.
Okay. Maybe there could be a further conversation down the line, perhaps when that brick is in place with Gavin in particular, to see whether we could be supportive of doing that assessment. I understand I'm paid to give a voice,
Yep.
and I'd like to hear from the community. And one of the areas I'm hearing a lot from the community and have for the last 4.5 years is this area. So it'll be interesting to see if we have any data to support or otherwise refute what we're hearing on occasion. And again, I hasten to say that the squeaky wheel always is the one you notice. And when you take the overall satisfaction rate you cited earlier and so on, I don't want to suggest that this problem area, but it is an area worth giving particular attention to.
Yes, I agree.
All these issues have been good stewardship of taxpayers' money. I think, Peter, there's anything more there. Is there a number of papers attached to this?
No, there's nothing else, Commissioner.
Which takes us to agenda item 5, which is an update on COVID-19. And obviously, Chief, in the latest requirements placed on policing in the country to ensure that to enforce, if necessary, the new requirement surrounding groups of 6. Can you tell me what the impact is on Norfolk policing of that requirement?
So, Commissioner, we are now into months of challenge, or the challenges of the COVID-19 crisis. I think as a county,
Month 6.5, I think.
By and large, we have fared very well. From our communities, my emails, letters, and people stopping me in the street is one of real support. And the biggest challenge during the first phase of the crisis was concerns about second homeowners, and we dealt with that in a very, very sensible way. We absolutely adopted the policy of engaging, educating, and encouraging before moving to enforcement, and our statistics, we were in the middle of the pack, if you like, as a force across the 42 that looked at, or 43, sorry, that looked at the number of tickets that were issued. When you now look at the COVID map of the country, thankfully, Norfolk really doesn't feature. We obviously had the challenges of Bannon Poultry, but the outbreak of the virus was it was absolutely localized within the Eastern European community, and to the best of my knowledge, it really did spread beyond that particular community. The numbers now in the county are the lowest in the East region, and they are substantially lower than some other parts of the country. Now, I've always taken the view that we are probably 2 or 3 weeks behind the rest of the country, so I'm expecting to see the numbers pick up, absolutely. We are gearing up for that, so we're putting now in place a dedicated command structure to ensure that we are in the best possible place to be able to deal with all the new and emerging challenges that will inevitably come along as we go through this second phase, and the challenges of managing restrictive measures upon society during the long dark nights of winter. But at this moment in time, assessment will be the partnerships are working well. We know where the risks are. We know where the people that need the greatest amount of support are. There's really good link up with the Norfolk Community Foundation and the National Emergencies Trust. I've spoken to the General Lord Dannett about the National Emergencies Trust in the last week or so. So as we head into the second wave, we are doing the very best to ensure that we have a COVID secure environment. We are anticipating a visit from the Health and Safety Executive at any time or any point. We are encouraging people to work from where and when appropriate, and we've demonstrated that we can maintain the business throughout a crisis. And what I am doing is I'm doing my level best to ensure that we are in the best possible place to manage that second wave when it hits the county, and it inevitably will. Actually, thus far, the last statistics I had, we had only issued 1 fixed penalty ticket. The number of 6. I'm not aware of there being any public order issues. You'll be aware of the very, very robust response that we've taken to raves. So far this year, I believe we've had 4 raves, and all of them have been brought to a premature end of the ravers. And the biggest one, you saw the response that Nick led on, tackling 500 plus. Big fines have been issued, and I'm I'm really pleased with the way that we have stepped up and hope that type of response and that community confidence can take one of policing Norfolk in the way that the constabulary does, with the consent and the support of our communities. Where we have to use enforcement powers, of course we will, but the vast majority of people understand the importance of safe, keeping themselves safe and protecting.
Thank you. You did have a prominent protest in the city a week or so ago, and a counter protest against it. Have fines been
They have, yes,
including
yes,
a £10,000 fine?
Yes.
The organizer. Did the organizer come from outside the county?
I believe. Well, at least one of them did.
Mm-hmm.
But Nick might know than I do. But
So
big fines have been issued.
Commissioner, there was a number of individuals we dealt with. There were arrests on the day, and then there were other individuals who we knew the identity of, and they were dealt with by report on summons. A female was issued in the custody suite upon her release, having been arrested, with a £10,000 fixed penalty notice. There were two other individuals that got the £100 fine for not dispersing, in essence, in terms of attending the gathering, and then another individual from outside Norfolk whose identity we were aware of, individual that was reported on summons. The upshot of that will be is that we believe that we have secured a reasonable belief that that individual was a facilitator, organizer, and therefore the natural conclusion is that, having been reported, comes into the remit of that £10,000.
Thank you. Do you welcome neighbors, friends? I don't know, reporting on what they think of this rule?
I was asked this question by media outlets, and I'm going to give a politician's answer. You're
not a politician.
No, I know, but I'm going to give a politician's answer.
You wouldn't want to be a politician.
We've policed it really well with the committees. The county has fared well in terms of transmission of the virus, the number of people that have tragically lost their lives. I think the communities in Norfolk are being really sensible and have been really sensible. And as long as we continue to deliver those positive messages and encourage people to respect the law and respect the guidelines, our phone lines would show that we are getting very, very few calls where you've got talking about what their neighbours are doing. Now, we are busy. It's a busy time of the year. You know exactly the challenges that we have with an awful lot of the hidden harm crimes. My focus is on those. My focus is not on neighbourly reports of people breaching the rule of six.
Well, if you think politics means obfuscation, I think you're a brilliant politician, because I don't think you answered my question directly. My question was, would you welcome reports into 101 or otherwise to the police when an individual is flaunting the rule of six?
I did answer by saying our priority is the hidden harms, the hidden crimes. That's where all the damage is being done. That's where my focus is. Thus far, we've issued one ticket. My officers are busy dealing with those really challenging, high risk, high harm offences. And are we going to be going around and checking on reports from neighbours where there are suspected of more, or might be 7 or 8 there? Then, Commissioner, no, we're not. And so I don't encourage the. I don't think it makes for good neighbourly relationships. And the bottom line is that we have far more important things to be getting on with than policing.
So for those that may have suggested otherwise, that this is to be encouraged, you think they're mistaken? They or don't fully appreciate the demands on policing in the town.
I'm Chief Constable, the demands that we are facing, and I've got far more important things to be dealing with.
Okay, thank you. Anything more to be said on COVID?
Well, Commissioner, unless you've got any specific questions in terms of where we currently are and our response, Julie will be leading it. The command structure is put in place. I believe Nick's arranged it as of Monday. There've been some changes across the command to accommodate it, but you know, Julie, Nathan, and some of the other colleagues deserve a huge amount of credit, Commissioner, for where they have placed the constabulary and our ability to be able to deal with it. I have every confidence as we move into the second wave that we will be in the best possible place to be able to deal with what the second wave brings.
Everyone that speaks to me, that's the impression I get. You may get some grumbling, and not because of the policing, but because of the necessary restrictions that have been imposed, and people are in having to live with those. But I haven't heard a breath of criticism of the way the police have dealt with policy of engaging and encouraging and educating and enforce only as necessary. So again, that's the great credit of Norfolk Constabulary, in my view.
Yeah, well, I'm really pleased, as you might appreciate.
The item is to the increase of visible policing, I believe, which begins on page 33. Who's going to speak to that?
Commissioner,
I'll ask Nick to talk.
Okay. Nick?
Thank you. So, Commissioner, obviously we've had sight of the paper, so I'll just pay attention to some particular highlights, if that's acceptable.
Please.
Okay, thank you. So, whilst theme in terms of visibility, specifically looking to give you an up to the Uplift programme. Page 34. Obviously, just the context is that the Home Office obviously announced the national plan to increase police officer numbers by 20,000 over the next 3 years. Norfolk Constabulary was allocated 67 additional officers for the first period. The precise details for years 2 and 3 have not yet fully been confirmed by the Home Office. I know you used a figure earlier on of 225. That's certainly figures that we are playing with, but they're yet to be precisely confirmed by the Home Office. The Home Office, working with all constabularies, including Norfolk, obviously set a baseline so that it could track those uplift numbers. And the establishment for Norfolk was set at 1,677 officers. Obviously, in addition to the challenge of delivering against that uplift, we have the normal organisational challenge of dealing with retirements, people transferring to other forces and leaving the organisation, in terms of natural turnover. So there's a real effort and focus in terms of HR and the organisation to be able to not only maintain the business as usual, but also to deliver that uplift. So perhaps moving on to page 35 and 3.1. As of September this year, with the current planned intakes that we have, we are on target to actually reach a rate of 1,772 by March next year. That's obviously over and above of that benchline target, 95 increase on the baseline figure, and recruiting over the actual first year of 67. What we'll do that is once we've got the finer details from the Home Office, we use that over recruitment to actually deal with the recruitment targets for the following 2 years as well. So that investment early on is actually supporting us getting more visibility in Norfolk early as we possibly could, which we're pleased with. Now, there's a lot of interest, obviously, in terms of the fact that the constabulary is recruiting. Being a police officer and working for the constabulary, it is a prized career. And at the moment, we currently have 673 applications in the system in terms of recruitment. And additionally, we have 22 transferee applications that we're currently considering and being processed by our team. So in terms of, the pool we're recruiting from, that's really positive. And I think actually also talks about the significance and the role of policing in communities and it as a valued career for individuals. We are tracking diversity of part of recruitment plans. We have Norfolk and Suffolk developed new post. Positive Action Recruitment Advisor has been appointed and in post. They have a number of functions. Amongst those functions, they support black and minority ethnic candidates through the recruitment process in line with legal responsibilities, and that's ensuring that we improve our diversity within the workforce, because of course police officers need to gain and maintain the consent of our communities. We can do that is obviously ensuring that we reflect our communities. So there's a lot of work in respect to that, and actually at this moment in time we can report that 7.7% of those 670 applicants are actually from BAME communities, and whilst obviously there is clearly much more work to be done, if you compare that with 1.7% BAME communities, you can see in the direction of travel. So early shoots, we're not anywhere near standing on any laurels. There's no laurels to stand on, but we are investing heavily in supporting applicants from minority communities. I think perhaps if I could turn to the approach to training on page 6, section 4 of the paper. Commissioner, I know you'll be aware that obviously we're moving away from the initial police learning and development programme for student officers, as it was recognised it was updating. The new police educational qualification framework will ensure that obviously new officers are equipped with the skills and capability for policing in today's society and well into the future. 2 routes of entry, obviously the police constable degree apprenticeship whilst serving as a police officer, and for those individuals that actually join us who already have a degree, then they will get the degree entry post holder programme approach, which gives them an academic diploma. That's being constable across Norfolk and Suffolk with HR well in track with our academic partner Anglia Ruskin University. The first cohort of those new police that's the investment that we've made in terms of Heverset Hold Hall L&D Centre of Excellence to support that new and exciting degree apprenticeship programme that we've got. I think then I was going to turn briefly, if I may, obviously in terms of policing visibility on operational matters and the increasing of those officers, those 67 in the first year lift. We have with the constabulary and colleagues and ESPOS reviewed our operational policing model, and we have made some decisions in respect to ensuring that we allocate to critical functions that we know will enhance our service to communities those additional officers. And as a result, in terms of that first year's increase, we have made investments in respect to rape and serious sexual offending, where we know that the demand is to rise, and we need to and wish to improve our service and the outcomes to some of the most vulnerable victims that we are here to serve and support. We've also recognised the challenge and threat from organised crime groups now operating in the County of Norfolk with increasing sophistication and challenge, and we have made investments in terms of how we can put more resource in terms of our response to combating serious and organised crime with the new serious and organised crime roles and structure that we've developed, which has gone live, which will actually go live next week, next Monday. The Chief has already alluded to Operation Moonshot in terms of the fantastic work that they do in terms of actively targeting the criminals, denying them the use of the road and causing most harm. And then again, we have to make investments in terms of detective investigations dealing with online child abuse, sexual abuse, multi-agency exploitation teams, and the hidden harm that the Chief referred to earlier in the meeting. OpSolve, as you're aware, is a huge investment in terms of how we can manage the crime that Norfolk is dealing with, how we can ensure that we deliver the best possible response we can with the resources that we've got, and further investments in terms of that desktop investigation team have been made. That will hopefully improve the service that individuals get, improve the timeliness of our response, and also working hand in hand with the investment that we've made within the control room, will hopefully have a much smoother way of dealing with volume crime in the County of Norfolk. And that will have some positive impact on the 101 issues that you alluded to earlier on, and that the Chief said hopefully we should start to see some improvements beyond currently got them in December of this year. And I've alluded to that in control room investments that we've made. And then, of course, you'll be aware that HMIC wanted us to improve the quality and standards of our volume crime investigation, and we've made some investment in respect to do that, to ensure that we continue to improve against the HMIC back. So that's a brief trot through the paper. You had any questions that you'd like me to explore?
You mentioned an increase of in head police officers of 95 over the figure. How many of those 90 community actually going to see out on the street?
So I think, as I've alluded to, when we've reviewed the policing model, we've obviously had to make a decision in terms of, you know, what are the greatest threat, harm and risks, where's the greatest complexity that we've got, and that I've seen as obviously make the investments that I've gone through, which not be visible in the sense of wearing a uniform, with perhaps the exception of the Operation Moonshot team, but they are all departments dealing with, you know, day-to-day policing, crime and criminality that our communities are. So to the point of visibility into uniform, the Moonshot investment is a direct that investment in those first tranche of uplift. But to the point around actually frontline delivery of services, those are the investments that we've made in those really serious high harm areas of our policing business, which is all designed to keep the community safe.
In the past year or two, we've increased the number of beat managers. Do you know offhand how many beat we have now?
So we have just slightly over 100 beat managers, and then on top of that, we've got about 14 dedicated manager sergeants, neighbourhood policing sergeants. A real significant investment that we made, and the Chief, and you obviously had that conversation about the PCSOs and where that, and part of that was obviously about Moonshot, but it was also about earlier investment a few years ago in terms of our neighbourhood policing. As we move forward as a command team, obviously myself, the Chief, Dep and others are talking about, when we've got the finalised details of uplift in years 2 and 3, what further opportunities have we got about where we need to place those officers. But there are considerable across the organisation and joint space with Suffolk in terms of ensuring that the organisation continues to deliver across such a significantly broad front that it has to, that we've yet to get some finalised details about where those staff will go in terms of years 2 and 3. But certainly about neighbourhood policing.
Do you favour the act that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure?
So prevention absolutely is better than cure. I think a well-known fact really right across all forms of human engagement and activity, whether it's in policing, you know, education, etc., etc. So yes, as a general principle, I absolutely do. But of course, what we've got to do is understand and get the evidence base that certain roles that are designed to deliver prevention do in fact do that for the value of the investment that we make, and therefore there needs to be careful consideration and balance across the fact that we've got an enormous amount of things that we have to respond to as well. But the maxim I absolutely agree with, but it's not always as straightforward as that principle would have us all believe.
I agree. Does the beat manager role fit within the concept, contribute to prevention?
Yes, I think they actually do, in fact, contribute to protect wherever they are and whatever they're dealing with. You know, the arrest of individuals.
I should have said visible policing. That is, people seeing beat.
Yes, absolutely, and that's what it was designed in part to deliver against in terms of the crime and policing plan, and also wider neighbourhood policing strategy. We recognise and understand of locally identifiable locally based police officers who can get a local relationship with their community and problem solve, be visible, have relationships, and support. And that's why we made that investment in those 100+ dedicated beat officers, and the layering over that. Thanks to you in part in terms of earlier preset rises, as well as the way in which we dealt with earlier financial challenges of those dedicated neighbourhood sergeants.
Because what we hear from most, I know we get far too many calls of necessity in terms of domestic violence, of rape, sex violence, child exploitation, and so on. But the community at large, two main preoccupations that I hear on a daily basis are very, very local as ASB, antisocial behavior, often by public drinking or drugs in public, and road issues, particularly filled up areas. And do I understand that the more visibility in policing, the better your chance of preventing an excessive antisocial behavior or misuse of roads and so on?
So there's certainly definitely an academic evidence-based principle about capable guardian theory, i.e. an individual in uniform who's in a locality and therefore will influence the behaviours of the people around them, as well as actually somebody who can actively intervene or engage or problem solve. So as an evidence-based that. But just the pure presence alone is not actually going all of our antisocial behaviour and crime ills. It's actually about partnership with analysts, understanding what's going on, intelligence department and colleagues who can pinpoint and help us understand the individuals actively engaged in the crime and criminality, and then allow those visible local leaders, those local beat officers, to target their limited and precious time on the right people and therefore get the biggest bangs for bucks in terms of being able to do that. Can we ever have a police officer who stands 24/7 outside a children's play area where there's reported antisocial behaviour? Sadly, we cannot. But if we are, through that local beat manager's relationship with local communities, as well as intelligence submissions, able to identify the one who's responsible, then they can spend a dedicated period of time targeting those individuals and stopping that antisocial behaviour.
So am I to understand, as your planning forecast go forward, you have a notion what Norfolk can hope to expect, which is a range of 225, 227 officers in total, that you will take that balance into account, and the community at large can expect to see some measure of increase in visible policing. You did mention county lines and so on. I'm not so sure that the public at large would consider that constitutes visible policing. You know what I mean by visible policing? It means seeing a uniform out and about, not whizzing by in a car. So will you take into account that balance you speak and expect some measure of increase in, let's say, Bobby's on the beat, some portion?
I mean, the chief might have a view here, Commissioner, but my I suppose my promise to you as his assistant is that we have an evidence-based method that we're using in the organisation to understand how what you've just described in terms of the public's desire for visible policing, i.e. police officers on the beat in local communities, with the challenges that the chief has already alluded to in financial position we find ourselves in, and the how we've got in terms of keeping police numbers up, and how we square that away when you know as well as we do that we've got to balance the budget every single year because that's the rules, and also know that there is some significant hidden high harm criminality that is ongoing and actually impacting quite overtly on Norfolk's communities. And if we were to take that documentary that we saw last night on Channel 5 that you alluded to, whereby two individuals go on an absolute rampage to normal citizens who are just driving her Mini and she gets robbed at knife point, to then farmer being approached and chased off with individuals with a shotgun to then a person sat in their home address in rural Norfolk, minding their own business, when they turn up, smash the window, discharge a shotgun into their ceiling and steal a second car. And the need for those detectives who are not in uniform, the need for other officers who work in intelligence functions, who work in managing informant functions, who aren't visible. But if we didn't have them, there is no way that you would ever be able to bring those individuals to account in justice and give them 10-year sentences as the court did. It's a real challenge, Commissioner, but my promise is that neighbourhood policing and beat officers, beat managers are absolutely in the mix, but there's a big mix that we're having to balance.
Commissioner, could I, and look, I don't want to make this sound like we're just going over the same old ground I was talking about just after 10:30, but there is a very real risk that if we end up in a situation where it is worst case scenario and we have a £7 million deficit, I could see the number of officers in roles that you talk about actually being reduced. Now, I really don't want to do that, but in terms of that deficit, in terms of the challenge around precept, it's an absolutely real threat. There's no doubt about that at all. And you know, I'm now my eight sets of budget consultations, 7 years in austerity, and this unequivocally is going to be the hardest, without any question at all. And one of the reasons is, whilst I really welcome that uplift in officers, it is absolutely tying one hand behind my back. And when you look at the number of police officers that we employ, the profile of our budgets in terms of 80% goes in salaries, this is going to be incredible. And we are already seeing this in our OBB sessions, and Peter will lay testament to this. We are going to be being presented with some really unpalatable, some of which you will look at and think, Simon, do that. But we are faced with potentially with a really challenging situation. Peter, is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, to strike a balance is what I guess our political leaders are paid to do, and sometimes they're shooting in the dark, and we've seen that surrounding the pandemic. For instance, balance has to be struck between genuine physical public health concerns and mental health concerns and economic concerns, social concerns, and so on. So some really complex, difficult balancing acts required. I would extend that to policing, and I would extend that to policing in the county of Norfolk. And the wider context is that people, by and large, the community, are suffering. They're suffering psychologically. Some people, mercifully a few, in global and national terms, from COVID-19, but the economy appears to be heading south. There's a big debt to be paid off. I don't know what the receipts are in terms of council tax and so on, but one cannot be oblivious to that real wider world in which we are living. So there's a really difficult balance between we must assure public safety and security in Norfolk. At the same time, we got to acknowledge that people are struggling to pay their bills at the moment, their mortgages and their rent and so on. Put food on the table. Food banks are now. We have to strike an appropriate balance. But my first job is to assure effective, efficient policing. That's that thin blue that can sometimes separate us from order. And I take that really seriously, but I cannot charge an extra 2%, let's say, on the precept, because I don't feel that all the receipts are going to come in terms of tax collection. I can't do that. So something has to give. Yep. Now, you and I appreciate the necessity of having a state-of-the-art training facility and having new investigators resources through new facilities in Swaffham and Broadland Gate and so on. Really important, but we need to get the message across to the public why those are not optional extras or really living high on the hog.
Yep.
It isn't the case, but we need to find why it isn't the case. And I think we have to do more in that regard. And it needs to respond to ordinary people's real concerns and needs and views. Now, I appreciate that the numbers in violent crime are growing, and but mercifully, most of us are touched by those crimes, but they are touched by these other things I mentioned. I know that burglary and robbery and car theft and so on is down, but ASB and road issues and so on look to me like they're probably going up. I don't know what this. So we somehow have to strike that really, really tough balance. So I think there's a really important communications exercise going to be required in this next precept and round. And you and I are going to have to have some really serious conversations around that. But for me, the start point, what I'm paid to do is two, amongst the 4 or 5 things that are in my job description. The very first thing is to assure effective, efficient policing, and the last one is good stewardship of the taxpayers' money.
Yeah.
And we have to strike that really difficult balance. And I will be sensitive to, particularly sensitive this time round, to the suffering and the pain and the hardship that the community at large is confronted with.
And I understand, and I really, I would doing my job if I didn't flag up to you the risks. And actually, I will be glass half full. Peter keeps my feet absolutely squarely on the ground, but I am. It would be remiss of you to have left this meeting thinking that we're going to be able to put more officers onto the beat. Now, Nick hasn't said that, but there's a real challenge to us here. That if it's not a positive settlement and there is no scope for raising the precept, then we face a £7 million deficit, which will inevitably mean Bobby's coming off the beat. And Commissioner, I'm sorry, I don't want to do it any more than you do, but actually. Well,
I'll conclude my side by a mantra which my staff have heard probably too many times. Man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what is heaven for? We have to go 110% beyond to try to retain the excellent staff as well as officers and I know you're committed to doing your absolute best. We have to lift every rock to find where there's a saved, and I think that's a sound small c conservative approach to life. We have to be cognizant that prevention may be increasingly the way to, in the long term, to invest to save. The more we can invest in prevention, maybe we can save in terms of enforcement in the future. But there's no quick, immediate gains on that, I accept.
No.
So those are some of the difficult discussions we're going to have. If I could just return briefly to the your presentation, Nick. Do we, in our recruitment process, and you mentioned you have quite a lot of people on the books now, 673, I think you said. Do you, in the recruitment process, do you seek out those that may be coming with some specialist skills?
So, I mean, Commissioner, it's not my main area of portfolio responsibility, so I can only talk in generalisations, but we have some rules to follow in terms of what employment law, National Police Chief Council, College Policing says about applications. But obviously, as there are elements of the process where people get to set out what their skills are, what they bring, and that's taken into consideration in terms of the recruitment process. So in that sense, I suppose the answer is yes. But if it's the specific point, are we able to cherry pick, or are we able to, sift through individuals who've got particular skills and then disregard or give them preferential treatment? Employment law is quite on what we can and can't do, and that becomes a challenge.
Okay, thank you. You made some reference to the BAME community. What does BAME stand for?
So Black and Minority Ethnic.
You missed the A in the middle. Asian.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Yes. Black, Asian, minority. Yes.
And Black, Asian, minority ethnic. What does minority ethnic mean?
Well, I mean, if you're after a textbook dictionary definition of that, then I can turn to it. But in terms of my, lay understanding, it, broadly speaking, is if you have a population that has a particular ethnic majority, white, and you have other individuals that are from a ethnic background, and there's significantly fewer of them under the definition of minority ethnic in the context of that society. Is that what you're alluding to?
So it's not necessarily color, then, is it? Ethnic.
It goes.
Well, no,
East European, for instance.
So another way of looking at it is the concepts of both visible and non-visible minority community membership. So, non-visible would be such as Eastern European communities who, to all intents and purposes, would look white, but actually have a different ethnicity, who would purport to the fact that, clearly the colour of their skin is a big delineator in terms of an ethnic from the majority of that society. Okay,
you say that 7.7% of candidates are from this. Do you know of that 7.7%? How many would the minority as we just described it? So what I'm getting at is, I understand that the Black community in this county is, in overall terms, it's a small community. I forget the percentage. I've seen it. Is it 1.5%, something of that kind? And the Asian community is about 3 times larger. And I suspect, without knowing the stats, that the ethnic minority community, if that's understood as everyone else who isn't part of the quote majority, that is Middle Eastern possibly, or East European and so on, it might be considerably larger, possibly. I don't know. What I'm is how many, what success are we having in getting visible minorities, and within the visible minorities, disparity between Asian and Black.
So, Commissioner, in terms of that 600 plus that are in the recruitment profile, I don't have that data immediately to hand. What I do know is that that I can certainly get that for you, and will give you a written submission in respect to that. What I do have is I've got quite a complicated graph in front of me, which again I can share with you in your office. But in essence, from June 2020. If I was to look at the totality of the constabulary, both in terms of special constabulary, police staff and police officers, the total number of our staff that come out in terms of Black and minority ethnic as a totality, it is something like 50 individuals, 1.57% of our total workforce. You've got 10 individuals, 19 ID observation, and then 20 individuals that identified themselves as mixed heritage, which adds up to a total combined kind of population, really, in terms of our workforce, which I can share with.
Is mixed heritage, does that embrace the ethnic minority? Would those from Eastern Europe consider themselves mixed heritage?
So I think it depends by which language and set you use, because over the years, in both academic and popular language, we have changed the way in which we described ethnicity. And, there are different data sets used by the government, by Home Office, by Ministry of Justice. There are different data sets used by academia, and the constabulary kind of adopt particular data sets. And in terms of the graph in front of me, the actual headings are mixed, Asian, Black, other, and then total. Now, that's one way to categorize, but as I've alluded to, there are many other ways of categorizing. So in terms of what mixed means on this graph, I don't have the precise detail, but I do take your point about we're individuals, and actually to try and amalgamate people as a group of, BAME individuals or individuals or mixed individuals. Well, actually, at the heart of those headings, human beings who will see themselves as individuals. So language is important, categorization is important, but at the heart of it all are individuals.
And diverse beyond this description, I would think, of gender in terms of orientation.
Most definitely. And there you bring in the Equality Act and the 9 protected characteristics, and yet another value set that we judge ourselves by. But actually, diversity is as broad as there are people in the world, as many as there are people.
If the BAME community represents, I think you said 1.5% of the Norfolk Police Force.
ME, ethnic, headcount total amongst police officers, staff, specials. The figure I've got from June 2020 stats is 50 individuals, which accounts for 1.57 in total. In Norfolk, the population estimate from 2011 suggests Black and minority ethnic community is 3.5%. So therefore, we're obviously less representative than the figure in 2011. But what we know, Commissioner, is that Norfolk is a very different population in terms of diversity than it was 10 years ago. But of course, until we get the census, assuming we get a new census, we won't be able to understand what it actually looks like today.
But even based on a 10-year-old census, we, well, a bit better than a third of what we're told is the makeup of the county. So really where I'm leading to is what measures do you take to close that gap? That's number 2. If somebody clearly is identifies themselves with the BAME community, does that get them extra points in terms of recruitment?
On the first point, Commissioner, Chief Constable Paul Sanford is working with a Chief Superintendent drafting the country's National Police Chief Council's Equality and Diversity Strategy on behalf of the service in the UK. Lucky that she works with us across Norfolk and Suffolk in terms of her knowledge and expertise, and they've developed equality diversity strategy and action plan that is seeking representations in our workforce, whether it's staffs. So there is a board that oversees work. There's a strategy. There's a dedicated action plan. Individual departments who have a responsibility there are held to account by the Deputy Constable. We're drawing on good and best practice from the policing and other sectors and industries in terms of how they have to achieve their diverse workforces. We visit other police organisations that seem to be in a stronger position than we are in respect to that. One of the direct new developments I've already alluded to, which is the recruitment of the Police Positive Action Advisor, who's there. Black and minority ethnic recruit candidates, encourage them. They're also going and engaging young, including black and minority ethnic individuals, encouraging them to consider a career in policing. What we know is from other sectors and also from police forces in the country is individuals need to see themselves in an organisation. And if you can get to a position whereby an individual organisation, both in terms of what that organisation does and how it represents diversity, then they're more likely to think that is a career in an organisation I want to be a part of. So we're working really hard in terms of trying to improve our diversity in terms of new recruits and new entrants. We supported the existing black and minority ethnic workforce through their staff association, EMPA. They have been working with us, giving us an insight into what it's like to work with ideas about how we can go out and engage young people. So there's a whole programme of work that is probably worthy of a specific paper, to be fair, Commissioner, that would detail you exactly our ambitions and the work that we're undertaking in this area.
I agree entirely with what you say, that people need to see themselves in an organisation, feel that it's a home for them. if they're considering a career there. Can you tell me what is the rank of the most senior BAME officer that you have, and what is the rank of the most senior woman we have in Norfolk Constabulary?
So the most senior officer we have is Temporary Assistant Chief Constable, and that's one of the command team members who you obviously know, who's not here. That's Julie Benf. Her substantive rank is as a Chief Superintendent as well. And we have another female officer who works on a national port, a temporary chief superintendent. In terms of BAME, I believe that is as a substantive inspector at the moment, but I do know that we have a colleague who will be promoted as a temporary chief inspector in about a month's time to cover a colleague who's off on maternity leave. And she'll be in the safeguarding and investigation arena, and will be very visible in terms of obviously, demonstration that the constabulary obviously is committed to not only recruiting but promotion and retention in terms of our BAME staff and officers.
Thank you. Shall we turn to the next agenda item, which is another police and crime plan theme, preventing offending, and in particular, this paper you've prepared is an overview of the impact of the COVID-19 on the criminal justice system in Norfolk. Can you tell me impact the difficult court had of remand hearings and extra demand on police officer staff with regard to caring for witnesses and so on?
Well, Commissioner, from a remand court hearing perspective, I don't, because we have the virtual remand courts, and because they've now been in existence for 3 years, we've had the establishment of the capability and the capacity to be able to get on with those. So I have to say I'm not aware that there are a problem with remand courts. There are, of course, a huge number of cases that are in the system, and there is a huge and the Crown courts in terms of the listings for cases, and that backlog probably won't be cleared for years. We all recognise that. There are a plan to create courts. I don't have the numbers yet, or I don't have the statistic what that looks like yet, and I don't believe that they have been published. But when you actually look at the response plans, priority is given based upon custody, time limits, detention and bail, and urgent applications for offences like domestic violence. Second priority is for any public health or coronavirus prosecutions and sensitive high-profile cases and cases involving children and vulnerable victims and witnesses. And there's been an increase in the virtual court system. It's all set out in the paper, Commissioner. I all recognise that we have some huge challenges around what the criminal justice system is going to look like now and for the course of the next 1 to 3 years.
The virtual courts is based on a system that we share with a number of other districts, video-enabled justice. Do I understand that there is consideration being given to rolling out a different system that may not be as police friendly?
There is a proposal that should happen, but we're currently working through the lead of DCC Tony Blaker in Kent to look at how we would continue to use and how we could interface the two systems so we don't lose the benefits that we've currently got with the system that already exists.
So to conclude on this, if I hear you correctly, there is a burden on constabulary the backlog in the courts.
Well, there will be an undue burden undoubtedly on the and witnesses, keep them on board. There are some exercises that are look at no longer pursuing through the courts certain crime types. So look, there is going to be some additional burden, no doubt, from my perspective, and that is in a time where crime levels are actually now getting back to what they were pre-COVID, and in some cases it's demand. So look, it's a team that's under significant pressure.
Has that been can that and is that being quantified and the bill being presented to Westminster?
Yes. So there is an ongoing debate with the National Criminal Justice Board. The NPCC colleagues are regularly having conversations around how we manage this. Chiefs are all really concerned about the delay and the continuing delays, and what has all the challenges around how do we now clear this backlog, because it's not getting smaller.
On page 47, there's a telling which shows increases in crime types. In 3 cases, there are double-digit figures.
Yes.
Domestic abuse, online crimes.
Yep.
And improving the investigative resources and capacity force to address some of those things. What can you say with regard to, and I presume the digital investigators are working on online crime?
Well, the digital investigators are doing a lot of work around our rape and our serious and organised crime.
Yes. And the number has shown a substantial increase, 23.3.
Yeah.
I made much when I was seeking election that we were going to put resources into rural crime, and I believe we have. Although we did lose of specials who chose to become regular off of that. But I recall that nevertheless, the number of hours that are going into seeing a rural crime has gone up. Why do you think that rural crime has gone up by nearly a quarter?
Well, Commissioner, what I would say is that the numbers in the overall scheme of things are small. It's less than 2 crimes a day. And I think that's really important to consider when you look at the size of the county. But you put more officers out there and you raise the profile of a particular crime type, it instantly leads to more crimes being recorded. I think the most important figure is the figure of the National Farmers Union, the volume of claims in comparison to the year before. It's never good seeing an increase in numbers. When you actually look at it, 528, it's not too surprising. The vast areas of rural Norfolk, if you were to say to me, right, you're going to have less than 550 rural.
Okay. Thank you for that. The next agenda item is the Standards Department complaints update, which begins on page 58. It's quite a lengthy document. What is to be said about this?
Commissioner, I'll ask Lynn, who heads up our Professional Standards Department, to talk you through that paper.
Hi, Lynn.
Afternoon, Commissioner. Just to apologise really for the length of the document. As you know, this was due to be tabled, but events overtook her, and it was quite a tricky document to produce because regulations and new regulations. We're quite a way down the line. New regulations. So with your permission, I'll take you through the executive summary. The pages beyond that really are the data that supports the observations from the executive summary.
All right.
So this document relates to a period of 1st of April 2019 to the 31st of March 2020, and it relates to made by members of the public under the Police Reform Act. The early part of the year, from February this year, there was a change in regulations, and now all dissatisfaction that's received is handled under regulations. So when you look through the document, that's where you'll see the slightly different reporting. A complaint can now be made on a wider range of issues, including the service provided by the service as opposed to just individuals, and this was all around encouraging organisational learning. The change allowed for certain types of complaints to be recorded and resolved outside the requirements of the Act, and those that are recorded under the requirements of the Act will be handled reasonably and proportionately, which was a slight change in the wording around the legislation in terms of investigations. There's been an increased focus in responding to matters in a timely way to secure police complaint system, providing good customer service on learning and improvement, and the reflective practice process was introduced, which encourages officers to reflect but focus on finding solutions rather than focusing on a punitive approach, as has been the case historically. Changes in the legislation has made changes to the right to appeal, and it's now applied for review of the outcome, and the responsibilities of these reviews is sitting with the local policing body, and I'll come to that shortly. So in terms of the overall executive summary, what we have seen as a result of the changes in the new regulation, public complaints have risen, and certainly at the period of 31st of March 2020, there have been an increase of 20% in terms of the complaints that have been made, and there have been a 17% increase in the number of allegations within those complaints. Said it wasn't totally unexpected, so prior to the changes in February, very specific around what was being recorded and the criteria for recording to complaint, who was eligible to complain, etc. And now it's much more about capturing more widely any dissatisfaction, concern. That's we've seen that increase in demand. Historically, we had an element of service recovery. Well, that's now recorded under the new complaint system. So actually changing what we're actually recording officially. We're still for us to be compared by most similar forces. So there's quite detailed criteria that we're required to submit to the IA in terms of what's recorded and under what category. Data is now being explored with the IOPC for publication, probably at the end of October, beginning of November, so we'll have a better understanding where Norfolk sits compared to other most similar forces. So page 62 really breaks down the different types of complaints and the key areas for complaints, both in terms of old regulations and in new. With you, there's just a change really in the language that's being used. The themes are not too dissimilar under the new regulations, but what there is a breakdown of understanding what some of the individual issues are in each of those categories. On the first point, regulations, other neglect or failure of duty, we now record under other neglect or found into four very specific areas, so it helps us to understand in much detail what the concerns are that are regularly being raised. Common themes that are arising are around lack of positive action being taken, disagreement with the decision either to maybe arrest or not arrest, or the progress of an investigation, and sometimes the standards and timeliness of investigations and the lack of victim updates. But there's been a huge amount of work that's been done with team and Opsolve in terms of trying to manage expectations at the stage of being notified of an investigation, to try and provide better up-to-date information, and hopefully we'll start to see some of the outcomes of that managing complaints. So the page 6 give you that breakdown there of the different types. Is there anything, Commissioner, that you wanted to ask in relation to those?
Is this a resource-rich process, Lynn?
Sorry?
Is this a resource-rich process?
It is, more so since the changes in regulations. That said, we're doing some work with SBOS within the department to understand in more detail what the demand is. We always knew that we would be recording more than we were recording previously, and that has an administrative impact, but we have options that we are around working more smartly and changing some of our processes to make sure that that's the case.
How many people do you have working on complaints?
Just on complaints alone, we've got 6 people, some of which are part-time and some are full-time, so six posts, and a manager and senior complaints manager.
They're all staff, or a mix of staff and police officers?
In terms of the complaint administrative function, they're all staff, but some of the complaint investigations are picked up by the serious case unit for the more detailed investigations that are required, and that's a mixture of officers and staff.
I wonder if I should invite Sharon to comment on the growing engagement of my office in this process.
Yes, Commissioner. Obviously, we've developed a very close working relationship with Lynn and her colleagues in Pierce region, and we have seen quite a lot of reviews come through that we've handled on Commissioner, and we continue to work closely with colleagues as those processes bed in. As Lynn has alluded to, that the IOPC will be producing statistics, so it'll be really interesting to see how our office compares with other OPCCs in terms of the number of reviews. But it is a new process that and we're trying to work together as both organisations, the best outcomes for everybody.
So it's early days, but are you able to indicate what those reviews have shown?
I don't know if that would be appropriate for the public session at the moment, Commissioner, until we get to the point where the IOPC have got all of the data to produce. Yes, but it is the right direction for us in terms of the work that we're doing.
That's good. Are you happy with the system, Lynn?
There's room for improvement, as there are always. It's been a new process to get to grips. We're always looking to improve on the way we've been. We do work very closely with your office. So I think it's really important, though, that processes we use, we fully engage in fully explore how we can improve, properly learn from things have gone wrong, and embed that operational learning, whether that's for ourselves or any of our partners.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you want to carry on, Lynn?
On page 63, with an increase in discriminatory behaviour allegations recorded in 2019-2020. There's 13 allegations recorded, which represents 3.5% of the total recorded, and this is a rise from 19 allegations the year previously. I don't know if there's anything in particular that you wanted to ask about that.
It's pretty small, isn't it, really, in the scheme of things?
Small numbers, and actually when you drill down into the figures, often it's a perception that people feel that they've been discriminated against because of their background, as opposed to any outright discriminatory behaviour from officers per se. So, but I continue to keep a really close eye on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
So then moving on to timeliness, whilst currently we're not being assessed against the timeliness of our investigations, under the new and the old regulations, there was an expectation that we would record within 10 days of receiving a complaint, and then there was some scrutiny around how long it took for us to finalise allegations, which previously was sitting at around about 89 working days to finalise allegations for local resolution, and 91 days for local investigations. We don't have that criteria currently, although my expectation is that there will be some form of guidance that the IOPC will instruct on what their expectations are around in terms of timeliness. So they, at the moment, they're just referring to the word timeliness. But we look to achieve a logging of 2 days of receipts and initial contact with a between 3 to 5 days. So the way in which complaints are handled has changed significantly with the introduction of these regulations, and there's strong emphasis on the listen, say sorry, fix it mantra, if you like, allow officers to be really creative about what action they can take to put right whatever it is that's gone wrong, and provide some meaningful answers to some of the concerns that have been raised. And so far, that's been really, really well embraced.
Sorry, Lynn, I've got a sore throat.
Then in terms of again, changes in regulations, complaints handled outside of Schedule 3 will either be resolved or not. So again, just slight changes in the language that's used. Next few paragraphs talk in terms of old regulations. So like I say, we're quite a long way down that road now. In terms of, you know, like I've already alluded to, we're not managing appeals which are now reviews. They come to yourselves, and we've had 19 reviews that have referred to the OPCC since the changes in regulations have come in. Issues that are received in force after the first are no longer handled outside, no longer handled through service recovery, which is, again, I've spoken, we believe accounts to that increase in the number of complaints that are being recorded.
For public purposes, Lynn, do you want to explain recovery? So
service recovery, the old regulations was around really low level matters. Perhaps something had gone wrong in terms of maybe somebody was unhappy because they'd not been kept up to date. Progress of an investigation where a quick review investigation by an officer would enable them to deal with that very quickly and bring people up to date, and may result in, you know, conversation with the officer in the case to highlight the fact that the person wanted more regular updates, something along those sort of lines.
But the concept of service recovery means reopening the file.
So service recovery is around putting right whatever was wrong in the initial reporting as quickly as possible.
Attempting to. Okay.
Yeah. And then in terms of conduct cases, there have been 40 internal conduct cases recorded against police officers, members of the Special Constabulary, members of staff between the 1st of April 2019 and the 31st of March 2020, and a misconduct hearing was held for one former officer and for a member of police staff, and 5 police attended misconduct meetings.
40 out of a staff of what do we say, 1,700 police officers, and roughly 1,000 staff. 40 out of getting on for 300,000 or 3,000.
Yeah.
Okay. Pretty small, isn't it? Small
numbers, but obviously, you know, there are occasions, unfortunately, where issues need to be addressed with some of the of staff and officers.
Yeah, inevitably in any organisation.
And then in terms of learning and lessons, we have the service improvement team, which replaced the, again, to understand what the key themes are in terms of complaints that we're receiving, identify options for putting things right, whether that's a process that's fallen down, or whether that's around individual. And the service improvement team will link in with local line managers and individuals to seek to put right any behaviours that might have led to a dissatisfaction being raised, and also through our publication of the learning. There have been 11 period and a further 6 since the new regulations have been introduced.
Well, learning is mistakes or fail, of course, is very important. Is part of this?
Occasionally, so it depends on what the conduct is. So the bar, if you like, for misconduct has been raised, so that professional standards departments nationally are dealing with the most serious breaches of conduct and codes of ethics. But occasionally they fall into that criteria, and then we look to services on officers.
Okay. Anything else you want to tell us?
I think that's it from me, sir.
Well, thank you, Lynn. Share Lynn told us what the turnaround times are in PSD. How are we doing on appeals? What's our turnaround time?
Commissioner, upon receipt, and we usually have 10 working days to that review, and then based on what the outcome is, there is a 28-day response if the review is upheld. And at the moment, we're more or less in line with where we'd expect in terms of our timeliness. We did have an early sort of teething problem that me and Lynn have ironed out in terms of processes. So I'm hopeful that we'll continue to adhere.
What happens if on the review from our office, there is some actions that we conclude are appropriate? Those become recommendations or directions?
Legislation, Commissioner, power to recommend that you have recommend to the constabulary either to look at putting right something we felt that wasn't handled properly, or look to reopen investigation, but we don't have that power to do so. That would be a legislative change.
Probably be wise, though, wouldn't it, not to give proper account to a recommendation?
I think when we make a recommendation under the legislation, the constabulary have to sort of publish if they accept it, and if they don't accept it, why, and that could become public. So could go down, but I think the relationship we hold with the constabulary is a really open one.
I can't imagine that being an issue for us, but so I'm asking generically.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Circumstances with this increased volume and so on. Staff.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. That takes us to agenda item 9, which is a verbal update on emergency services collaboration. How are we getting on with the FRS, Chief?
Well, Commissioner, looking steady as she goes. And I know you might be saying that the business case around community safety is now at an advanced stage. I hope to be able to present that as part of the plans to be put in place by April of next year. And we will then start to look at other collaborative opportunities, including the command and control centre work.
Sorry. My question was specific to the FRS. How's that going? In terms of training, for instance, we have this new training facility. We got the fire service in there as well now. Conversations
going with the fire service around the use of Heatherset Old School and the use of other sites in the county. There's a review ongoing about the arrangements around the payment for facilities that Peter's overseeing and leading all the different work streams that you're aware of are on track.
What can you say with that, Peter, in terms of the financial aspects of collaboration?
A report coming to the next SGB, but the review that we've done has showed that the collaboration around estates has been really beneficial to the constabulary and PCC in terms of and reduction in running costs and capital receipts that we've generated, albeit on a revenue basis at the moment. The fire service do pay for some aspects of the estate they occupy. So there will come a point, and the paper will draw. We need to address some of those issues, but at the moment we are in hand in terms of the running costs we've saved and the capital receipts rated.
So do you regard the surrendering of in Building 8 at the OCC as a free offer to the Fire and Rescue Service?
Well, in terms of financial payment, that is the current arrangement.
It's a free offer.
What the paper will, it is, but you know, in terms of the collaboration and the partnership that we've done around the estate, around the county of Norfolk, benefited significantly in terms of overall running costs and capital receipts. So the benefits have been significant, and to this point have outweighed offers, but there will become a point where we will need to address that.
And in terms of collaboration, we have how many? Is it 20 call attendants in the control room? Call on behalf of the Fire and Rescue Service. To what extent are they collaborating or cooperating with these many more call attendants we have on the police side.
Commissioner, that's a piece of work that's in train, and I'll say that with little collaboration.
It is a piece of work, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anyone want to say anything more on emergency services collaboration? No? Hang in there, we're nearly there. Agenda item 10, emerging operational and organizational risk.
Commissioner, look, we've had a longest conversation around this. The biggest challenge at this moment in time is the budget, without any doubt at all. I think we're well placed to deal with COVID, but my great concern is what the budget settlement will look like, what the precepting arrangements will look like, and how we are going to bridge. That's my primary concern at this moment in time.
Can you present to me the possible options? When are we going to start to tax?
Peter, 6-8 weeks.
Yeah, so the challenge panel process in terms of a first, we will then have wash-up sessions in October where we will develop mitigation plans in order to make sure that we have options that will cover the worst case scenario should it arise. We'll present to the chiefs in November and then start consultation with you, Commissioner, and your office after that point.
Okay, thank you. Any other business?
Not from the constabulary side of the house, Commissioner. Thank you.
Sharon, do we have any?
It's been tabled, Commissioner.
I noticed we had proposed meetings. The next Estates Governance Board will be on the 6th of October. Peter, how many staff do you have working in particular?
It's roughly 30 FTE across Norfolk and Suffolk.
How many?
Around 30, but that's across the states. They provide services to Norfolk.
I see. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your indulgence, everybody. I think we've covered a lot of important subjects. I'm sorry it's taken so long. The issues are really key, and it is a critical time for, both in terms of potential for this virus to get away on us again, and in terms of hands-on policing. And great credit to you and to the constabulary for what you're doing to continue policing by consent, which is a wonderful thing. I wish they'd somebody pull the plug on American cop shows from television, because it gives such a wrong impression of police in this country. And I think we can be proud of what we have in this country and in this county, and in this county in particular, a really efficient police force that's been recognized nationally, and credit to you and the chief officers and every man and woman wearing a uniform or working on the staff. So thank you very much. And until the next time, have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Commissioner, bye-bye now.